little to impact the wider political and military dynamics of the Mediterranean world, a testament to just how insignificant he was. He was so insignificant, in fact, that following his death, the West was going to get a sneak preview of what the political order of the future was going to be. Ricimer had stalled for months before picking a new emperor after the deposition of Avitus, and then stalled for months again after the execution of Majorian, testing the waters to perhaps see what would happen if he just left the office vacant. Next week, Ricimer will wade out even further into the post-imperial waters. After the death of Severus, the German general will refuse to elevate a successor, and then keep on refusing to elevate a successor for 2 full years, until finally, Leo had to step in and put an end to this unprecedented interregnum. This week's episode is brought to you by Audible. As you know, Audible is the internet's leading provider of audio entertainment with over 100,000 titles to choose from. When you're done with this episode, go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome. That again, audiblepodcast.com/Rome. By going to that address, you qualify for a free book download when you sign up for a 30-day trial membership. There is no obligation to continue the service, and you can cancel anytime and keep the free book download. You can also keep going with one of the monthly subscription options and get great deals on all future audiobook purchases. This week, I am going to stick with the basics and re-recommend another classic, The Histories of Rome by Livy. This is the stuff that really fired me up to start producing a podcast in the first place. Cincinnatus, the 12 Tables, the secession of the plebs, Marcus Furius Camillus, the good old days. Just remember to go to audiblepodcast.com/Rome so that they know who sent you. Hello, and welcome to the History of Rome. Episode 177, The Burning Ships. In the summer of 465, the quote-unquote Emperor Libius Severus died. No one paid him much mind while he was alive, and so no one paid him much mind when he died. But though the emperors of the West literally didn't matter whether they lived or died, no one thought that a successor wouldn't soon be appointed. The new appointee would be another puppet, of course, but the show must go on. But while the Mediterranean world wondered who would be the next emperor, a funny thing happened. No next emperor appeared. The virtual king of Italy, Ricimer, was done with all that rot. He was in charge of Italy. He had been in charge of Italy, so why should he have to share power with anyone? So from the summer of 465 until April of 467, he didn't share power with anyone. There just wasn't an emperor of the Western Empire. Over in Constantinople, the Eastern Emperor Leo was not thrilled about this development, but he was in no immediate position to do anything about it. Through all of 466, the Eastern Empire was dealing with fairly serious raids by the Huns and the Goths. Leo had his hands full, and so Ricimer got away with his de facto kingship. But as 466 gave way to 467, the Western Empire's problems started becoming the Eastern Empire's problems, and so Leo felt obliged to finally do something about the vacant imperial throne in Italy. And which problem was it that specifically was becoming the Eastern Empire's problem? The Vandals, of course. Genseric was still hankering to get Olybrius in power, and with Ricimer refusing to listen, the Vandal king decided to turn up the heat on Constantinople. So Genseric extended Vandal piracy into eastern waters and started raiding Greece. His strategy, I think, was to trade stopping the piracy in Greece for the elevation of Olybrius. But if this was the point, then it backfired spectacularly. Because mostly, these new raids just made Leo really, really mad, and convinced him that it was finally time to do something about the illegal Vandal kingdom that had been squatting in Roman North Africa for the last 30 years. But before he could do something about the squatters in North Africa, Leo wanted to make sure that the resources of the West would be properly mustered to help out the cause. And with King Ricimer not exactly the most dependable bloke on the block, Leo decided that it was high time he filled the almost 2-year-old imperial vacancy. But who to elevate, who to elevate? He wasn't going to give Genseric the satisfaction of elevating Olybrius, because Olybrius might wind up being even less dependable than Ricimer. Because at some point in here, Genseric had made the grand gesture of releasing the old Empress Licinia Eudoxia and her daughter Placidia, and putting them on a boat to Constantinople. Reunited with his wife, or should I say probably united for the first time with his wife, Olybrius might be thinking that Genseric wasn't such a bad guy after all, and maybe worth allying with if he ever got the chance to be Western Emperor. So for Leo, Olybrius was ruled out. So who did that leave? Interestingly, it left the man who very nearly became Emperor of the East, just before Leo wound up getting the job back in 457, Procopius Anthemius. Anthemius, as you'll recall, was the grandson of the old Praetorian prefect Anthemius, and he was married to the late Emperor Marcian's daughter. Near the end of Marcian's life, the emperor had heaped honor upon his son-in-law, and it looked a lot like Marcian himself expected Anthemius to succeed him. But then Leo was crowned instead. This meant that for the last few years, Anthemius had just been kind of lurking around Constantinople, offering a totally plausible alternative should a bunch of conspirators get together and decide to do away with Leo. So Leo decided to kill two birds with one stone. By appointing Anthemius Emperor of the West, he was not only getting a rock-solid military commander, eminently capable of doing his part in the coming war with the Vandals, but he was also getting rid of a dangerous rival. So in the spring of 467, Anthemius headed off to Italy to assume his new position. But what about Ricimer, you ask? Was he just going to accept Anthemius' elevation? Well, maybe he would, and maybe he wouldn't. But Anthemius didn't just throw on a backpack and wander into Italy like some random tourist. As he approached the Alps, he swung through Dalmatia and picked up Marcellinus and Marcellinus' army. Then he crossed over into Italy. Ricimer could either get with the program or fight to the death. But just remember that even if you beat me, Leo is probably going to take it personally and turn that armada he's building to fight the Vandals against you. So why don't you just get with the program? But that said, it's not like Anthemius wasn't aware that he was a Greek-speaking outsider in Italy. Ricimer and the Italian nobility formed a pretty tight clique these days. So for Anthemius, leveraging his way into power was one thing. Staying in power and being able to do anything with that power, that was a whole different ball of wax. So straight away, he arranged a good old-fashioned political marriage between his only daughter and Ricimer. Look, now we're all one big happy family, right? Cool. Good. Because we're about to launch like a 6-pronged assault of the Vandals, and it's important that we're all on the same page. At almost exactly the same time, Leo was having these same sorts of thoughts, and so he married his daughter to Anthemius' son. So now we're all one big happy family, right? Cool. Because seriously, this is going to be a very complicated operation, and we all need to be together on this thing. But there was one member of this big happy family who wasn't cool. Leo's brother-in-law Basiliscus. And unfortunately for everyone, Basiliscus was about to be named the point man for this very complicated operation. Depending on who you believe, Basiliscus was either too dumb or too clever by half to be leading the invasion, but under pressure from the war. And it's not like this war was going to be some little PR stunt. The East had sent armies west to keep a lid on the Vandals at least twice before, but both of those were more shows of force or negotiating tactics than anything else. But Leo was going big. This was not about negotiation. This was about conquest. Our forever exaggerated sources are probably just a little exaggerated, but still, just to give you an idea of the scope of this thing, they say that Leo spent tens of thousands of pounds of gold building a fleet, that he spent hundreds of thousands of pounds of silver. They say that 1,100 ships bearing 100,000 men set sail from Constantinople in the spring of 468. Like I say, this was not about negotiation, this was about conquest. While this fleet sailed, the Western forces prepared to do their part. The General Marcellinus and his army were tasked with the mission of dislodging the Vandals from their bases in Sardinia and Sicily, and then providing logistical support to the main Eastern invasion army. There is also some scanty evidence that Anthemius tried to either send Roman forces up around through Spain, or that he tried to induce local forces there to join in the campaign, opening up what would have been a fourth front of the war, but it doesn't appear to have come to anything. At first, the invasion went as well as the Romans might expect, given their firepower. The massive eastern fleet was met by a force of Vandal ships, but the Vandals were completely overmatched, and it is reported that hundreds of their ships were sunk. Following this initial victory, the two main fronts of the war were officially opened. A land army was deposited near Tripoli under the direction of a general named Heraclius. This army would approach the Vandal capital of Carthage, while Basiliscus led the rest of the fleet around to blockade the city. Heraclius had no trouble with the locals, and as he approached Carthage, he captured every city he passed. Meanwhile, up north, Marcellinus had opened up the third front of the war off the Italian coast, and after driving the Vandals off Sardinia with relative ease, he turned and began the slightly more difficult task of winning back control of Sicily. At this point, all was going well. All was going according to plan, and it looked like North Africa would be retaken in a matter of months, if not weeks. But then things started to unravel. I'm not sure exactly when this happened, but it had to have been shortly after winning back Sicily. But Marcellinus was on the island preparing ships to continue on to North Africa, either as logistical support for the land army, or to simply sail down with an army of his own and join the fight. Whatever he was up to, he never got off the island. He was betrayed by some of his officers and murdered, almost certainly at the instigation of Ricimer, who feared that his rival was gaining too much power. Ricimer then refused to let any of the Western ships leave for North Africa. No supply runs, no reinforcements. Okay, well, that's not ideal, but the Eastern Army is like 100,000 strong, right? More than enough to finish the job on their own. As I just mentioned, there are two possible explanations for why this invasion is about to turn into such a disaster. The first is that